In today's tutorial, I am going to share my process for how to paint the Ranunculus flower. This is episode 6 of our Watercolor Florals series, and today's video is sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. Welcome back, guys. My name is Shayda Campbell, and let's talk supplies to get started. Ooh, don't want to spill my flowers. Okay, so I am using hot pressed watercolor paper from Canson. This is a block of paper, which means all the paper pieces are attached, and so that means you don't have to stretch them, which is really great for a lazy watercolorer like me. Stretching the paper just helps it to keep from buckling when you're painting. I have my koi watercolor set from Sakura, some paper for blotting, and 2 glasses of clean water. And then for brushes, I'm using a number of synthetic round brushes. The tiny one is a number 1, there's a number 4 and a 5, and then a larger one. And if you're following along today, you'll also want some scrap paper. I'm using graph paper and a pencil, and what we are going to do is make a plan for our painting. So I'm mapping out where should my flowers sit on the page. And a spiral is a great thing to use to represent the ranunculus flower because they have all those many layers and layers of petals. And we add a few wonky stems. The stems kind of always have that weird kink in them, and we'll just draw those. Here, I'll go over it in marker so you can really see, but I've just decided, okay, I'm doing about 4 large flowers. They're all slightly different size. Where should they sit? Where should those stems sit? I want to do a few smaller flowers or buds sort of popping off to each side, and I think doing a plan like this will just give you so much more confidence when you are ready to put paint on the paper. So page plan first. We've got a design now for our painting. Then the next step is to mix up our color palette. So before we ever start painting, we make a plan and then we mix up our colors, and I want a sort of summery, warm color palette. So I am mixing my greens first. I'm using sap green and olive green, and then I'm mixing in a little crimson red. The red just makes the green, I think, look so much more natural. It kind of mutes it a little bit because it is opposite on the color wheel. And then I'm mixing up all these different shades of pinky peaches, and I've got a really dark burgundy rich red. And so now I am ready to paint. I have a plan. I know what this painting is going to look like approximately. I have my paper here. I have my color palette. So if you are nervous when you go to actually put paint on the paper, I think having a plan and having the colors chosen and mixed can really set you up for success. And then we're going to do one more thing. We're going to take a very light paint, and we are actually going to keep mapping out. So in a very soft, delicate way, I've actually transferred my sketch to the page, and now I think I can feel confident starting these ranunculus flowers. So I am taking a large brush for this one, and I start in the center of the flower, and I just do all these little semicircles, all these little curved lines, and they don't quite touch, and some of them are larger. I'll use the belly of the brush and drag it across the page, and some of the lines are finer. I'll just use the tip of that brush and get a nice, thin, curved line, and you can see I leave lots of negative space here, and the negative space kind of represents all those layers of petals and petals and petals that make up the ranunculus flower. Along the top of the flower, I'll have it quite smooth and rounded, and then along the bottom of the flower where the viewer would sort of be looking at it, I'll have some of those floppy petals kind of turning down. Then I'm going to take a smaller brush and a darker color. I've got them all mixed up there, remember, and I'll add a little bit of darker, broken, curved lines to the tops of some of those other larger curved lines. And I find that my ranunculus flower comes together by sort of constantly going back and adding more and more. And that's also a process of wet and dry, so we'll allow that one to dry a little before we add more. We'll go on to the next one and keep doing those broken lines, those curved lines, and you can add, or you can use whichever size of brush, feels right to you. You might get a little darker towards the center of the flower. You might go back to the first flower as it dries and add some more darker peach and add some more broken lines. So you're just playing around with wet into wet, and as the paint dries, I think you'll find that you have a chance to add more and more broken lines and just watch them seep out ever so slightly as they do on wet paint. Now I want to take a second to thank the Great Courses Plus for sponsoring our video today. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription on-demand video learning service with top-notch lectures and courses taught by professors from the Ivy League or other experts from places like National Geographic and the Culinary Institute of America. With the Great Courses Plus, you'll have unlimited access to a huge library of over 11,000 video lectures about anything that interests you: science, math, history, literature, or even lifestyle things like how to cook or become a better photographer. You know, I spend all day with my camera making these videos, but recently Chris and I were in Paris and it really sparked an interest in travel photography in me. I really wanted to get better, and so over the weekend I took a course on the art of travel photography. It was taught by Joel, and he is an award-winning National Geographic photographer, and it was such an informative, fun course to take, and oh my gosh, so much better than just like watching trash TV on the weekend, so I felt like I learned a lot. Now, the Great Courses Plus has an awesome offer for you. They are offering a free trial, so head to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Shayda Campbell to subscribe and start your free trial, or click the link in the video description. Okay guys, as I said before, this becomes an exercise in wet into wet and knowing how long to let that paint dry before you go back in and add some more broken curved lines. You can see if the paint has dried completely like it has at the top of this flower, I'll just get these really sharp lines. But if the paint is still a little wet, those lines will bleed out into the wet area slightly and give a really natural look. I think a little of both is good. You want some sharp lines to show how many layers and layers of petals are there, and you want some loose, wet lines. Those lines will look more natural and capture that ephemeral beauty of the flower. Now I am mixing a little more yellow into one of my peachy pinks, and for this fourth flower here, I want to capture just a slightly different color. I think that's also part of the beauty of painting flowers, is that they can all kind of be in the same color palette but differ just ever so slightly, and that's what my real bouquet of ranunculus looks like. Some are pinky, some are peachy, so I'm just playing around with my color palette a little. I'm painting the bud up at the top here, leaving just a little bit of a highlight on top and making it a little darker towards the bottom. For this fifth flower, I'm making this center a little more yellowy, and then surrounding that yellowy center, I'll get a little more pinky peachy, and I'm really liking the way this one turns out. Also, I wanted to mention, if you feel like your ranunculus are looking too much like roses, just keep them really round on the outside. Don't do too many of those floppy petals. If they are very, very circular, I find they will look like that nice tight ranunculus blossom before it really opens up. And as I finish these flowers, I'm just continuing to do more and more broken lines, and you can see how that contributes to the look of those layers and layers of petals. And yeah, I think the flowers are looking good, so I will grab my green and start planning where the stems are gonna go. I'm gonna do that in a very, very light green to start with. And then once I'm kind of confident with where all these stems are going to lie, then I'll go over it with a bit more green with a bit more pigment. And that's what you see me doing here, and I like to kind of change my pressure so that you get that funny look of the stem being a little crooked. It can be thin in some areas and thicker in other areas, and that you just do that by adding a little more or a little less pressure. And as this is a very, very loose watercolor painting, so everything is a little perfectly imperfect, and some of the stems are quite thin, and I'll add a little extra darker green to show a little bit of shading on each stem. The bud gets these funny scraggly little leaves kind of engulfing it, and I will do some big scraggly leaves. So I'll start with the shape of the leaf, and then I'll kind of use the brush to feather out a bit and show how there's all these broken shaggy teeth on the sides of these ranunculus leaves, and maybe add a little more pigment and just sort of play around with it. And I'll tuck some leaves in behind some of the blossoms, some of the flowers. And at this point, I'm really just trying to look at the whole piece, look at the piece as a whole and say, where does it need another leaf? How can I make sure this looks balanced? How can I make sure the piece, looks nice and it's pleasing to the eye? So at this point, you're probably going off of your plan a little and saying to yourself, where did these flowers end up? Because things never go quite according to plan. And where can I add some more leaves to make sure that, the painting isn't too top heavy? And that's kind of what I'm doing here, is just adding some more of these big leafy shaggy guys. And I'm really liking how this is turning out. It's a very, very loose representation of the ranunculus flower, and I'm quite happy with it. I'll continue to add some more of those darker, sketchy, broken, curved lines to each of the flower until I'm sort of happy with the way that they look. And if there's any portions of the flower that look a little unbalanced, you can always go through and fix that at the end as well. This one looked a little funny on the one side, but there we go. That's my painting all finished. I really like the color palette. I like how summery and warm it is, and I really love how loose and free this painting is. Just a reminder that you can get this as an art print. All the channel bonus content is available on my Patreon site for just $2 a month, so check that out. And don't forget to click the link in the video description to try your free trial of the Great Courses Plus.